The Glass Steagall Act and the National Bank by Mallory Mendoza, Jackson Hawley, and J.T. Nuttall. Background of the National Bank. The U.S. was just coming out of World War I, resulting in a post-war economy. Now that the war was over, troops were returning home, and with them came the generation of baby boomers. Many women remained in the workplace while others chose to return home to the traditional ideas of gender roles. This era, later labeled the era of good feeling, was primarily consumer-based with the notion of buy it now, pay it later. Big business owners seized this opportunity to partake in shady business methods and form monopolies, but over-speculation of stocks, partnered with America's common practice of buying on margin, resulted in the crash of the stock market. National Bank. The National Bank during the Great Depression had first stayed with laissez-faire and not interfering with the affairs occurring around them. This is why the problems of the Great Depression were allowed to continue to get worse. Unfortunately, these problems in a laissez-faire bank resulted in the hands-off economic system of the three presidents leading up to the Great Depression, allowing monopolies to begin. After President Roosevelt took office, he immediately threw out the laissez-faire ideas of the National Bank through the bank holiday. This was when the banks were closed down for 6 days and millions of dollars were pouring out to the banks from the National Bank. This definitely restored the confidence of the population in the National Bank, and many people flocked to the bank to deposit instead of withdrawing. Moreover, the National Bank was seen very hands-on in helping the nation out of the Depression with the Emergency Banking Act as a product of the success of the bank holiday. This allowed the Federal Reserve to issue currency to banks in times of need. With a laissez-faire national bank, this money would have not been able to be distributed and the bank would still be closed. Background of the Glass Steagall Act. For the years 1929 to 1939, North America, Europe, and other industrialized nations entered into what became known as the Great Depression. By 1931, 8.02 million people were unemployed and the number continued to grow. Current President Herbert Hoover took little action when it came to fixing the situation, and in March of 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt took his place. FDR presented his New Deal program in an attempt to pull the U.S. out of the Depression. The Glass Steagall Act. The Glass Steagall Act, also known as the 1933 Banking Act, was named after two of its sponsors, Carter Glass and Henry S. Steagall. It was part of President Roosevelt's New Deal program, which he instilled in an attempt to pull America out of the Great Depression and counter the failure of almost 5,000 banks. It angered businesses because it was the separation of commercial banks and investment banks, which was what companies previously relied on. Commercial banks took the deposits and were not allowed to undermine. Investment banks had to have investments by bigger companies or people. Since the people who were being invested didn't meet up with the payments of the investors, those investors would be out of money. This angered traditionalists because it went against the previous laissez-faire methods that America and previous presidents such as Hoover had been following. The Federal Reserve strengthened the regulatory power of the Federal Reserve because the members of banks would have to report all of their investments, transactions, and loans to the Reserve, which ultimately would strengthen sound banks and destroy weak ones who were not part of the Reserve. By mid-1934, bank failures had been stopped, when before, around 90% of banks had closed their doors. Thousands of banks were reopened and rejoining the Federal Reserve program. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation insured the bank deposits with a pool of money collected from banks. This promoted more of the small rural banks to increase deposits because they knew their money would be insured. The public view was strongly for it, even though FDR was unsure of it because of the failure of previous similar bills. Similarities and differences. In terms of effects by the Great Depression, the Glass Steagall Act affected the Great Depression in fighting to pull the U.S. out, separating the private and commercial banks. In contrast to this, the National Bank was affected by the Great Depression by being refined in order to better suit the needs of the U.S. with a more hands-on type of economy and flow of money. During the time of the Great Depression, the National Bank had initially started off very laissez-faire, and then transitioned into a non-laissez-faire program as the economy required more immediate action, in contrast to the Glass Steagall Act, which was formed with non-laissez-faire intent. Both the National Bank and the Glass Steagall Act were considered not laissez-faire in the grand scheme of things due to the fact that their ideals were to assist the American people instead of allowing them to fend for themselves. Through the separation of investments, and giving faith back to the Americans to trust the banks and Roosevelt. The impact. The National Bank had the greatest impact on American history because it halted the Great Depression from getting any worse and potentially saved the nation's economic status. The National Bank holiday provided relief for the banks that had previously been failing during the Great Depression, and also restarted the people's faith in these banks. Without the banks gaining income from this, more and more would have continued to fail, and it would have been potentially made it longer, or even impossible for a U.S.'s economy to gain stability once more. The National Bank eventually got the citizens' money back and stabilized the country through wars like World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and provided a better economy for generations.